Welcome to the Friday Muse. I'm Karen Sullivan, and each Friday I'll be exploring astrology, archetype, myth, symbol and our inner life, following those threads that connect our personal experiences with the wider world, looking at the interconnection between soul, body, earth and cosmos. So get your headphones on, settle in and enjoy this week's Friday Muse. I'm feeling excited this week because this Friday Muse today is the first of 4 episodes exploring power through the Leo Aquarius axis and the lunation cycle. It's also part of my free resource over on the portal community, and that is a guide with the astrology and grounded practice and reflection, a guide to that Leo eclipse lunation cycle. The portal's free to join, and there's so many other creators there. There are both paid and free resources there. So much over in that community, and such a beautiful community. So I'll put the link below. It's part of the Lunar Rhythms collection I'm making. So go check that out if you're interested in this. I also want to mention that in January, I started the year off with a podcast called Myth of Control, and that was a deep dive into power as an archetype. It looked at where power turns into domination, but also its maturation into stewardship. But I also looked in that how anxiety can stem from trying to control what was never ours to command. So this is part 1 of 4. Over the coming weeks, we'll move from the myth of control into the world of Zeus and the darkened sun before meeting Hebe and Ganymede, who were cupbearers to the king. But we'll finally arrive at that Aquarian water bearer and the possibility of collective stewardship. So today I want to begin closer to home by looking at what power is, how we first encounter it, and how it moves through our personal relationships and communities, but also the wider political world. I'll also introduce the 4 expressions of power and provide a container for the rest of the series with the power over, power within, power to and power with. This Leo lunation begins beneath a total solar eclipse on the 12th of August. The sun has long been an image of sovereignty, authority, and that organising centre that everything else appears to move around. So during an eclipse, that familiar source of light is temporarily obscured. The solar centre's still there, but its light can't be taken for granted during this eclipse. So for me, this feels like a fitting image for the conversation about power. But also because on that Leo Aquarius axis, we have Pluto sitting in Aquarius, and Pluto is predominantly about power and wealth and the underworld, of course. So we often associate power with the public figures, governments, wealth and status. So we see it in the people who make laws, control the resources and command large audience, be that social media influencers or celebrities. But most of us meet power much earlier and much more intimate settings. So we meet it in the family member whose mood is determining the atmosphere of a house. We experience it when one person controls the money and has greater influence over the choices available to everyone else. We learn about it through who's allowed to be angry and who is expected to keep the peace. And also, it's about who is heard when there's a disagreement. This happens in our families. So as children, we're dependent upon other people for our survival. And the adults around us decide where we live, what we eat, and what behaviour is rewarded or sanctioned or punished. But through these early relationships, we start to form an understanding of authority. So we learn whether power feels protective or frightening, or whether that power is reliable or unpredictable. We might learn that speaking openly is welcomed, or that safety depends upon staying quiet and anticipating what other people need from us. And these experiences can remain with us long after we've grown up. So someone who learned to monitor the emotional climate at home for their own safety might continue to do this in adult relationships. So they notice the slightest change in another person's voice and immediately begin adapting themselves. There are children who were rarely allowed to make decisions. So as adults, they might find that even a simple choice creates a level of anxiety for them. Another child might have learned that being in control was the safest position, so they might struggle when circumstances require trust, compromise, or dependence. So really, this is one of the reasons that power is such a profound archetype. It really reaches into our longing for safety, into our fear of helplessness, or our need to have some influence over the conditions of our lives. At its most basic, power is the capacity to affect what happens. So it allows us to choose, create, protect. It even allows us to refuse and make changes. So it gives us the ability to shape our own lives and influence the lives of others. The ethical questions begin with how that capacity is exercised and who carries the consequences of that, and whether the person holding that power can be challenged. Control is one expression of that power. It often grows from a deeply human wish to reduce uncertainty. We'd like to know all the time what's coming. We want our plans to work and the people we love to remain safe. And of course, we want our bodies to continue doing what we ask of them. So we want those structures around us to remain dependable. But life repeatedly reminds us that our control has got its limits. We have illness arriving, changes in our relationship, or we lose jobs. There can also be the weather with a storm, flood or fire that completely alters the landscape. And then we have those political decisions that are made far away from us, but they enter our homes through the cost of food, fuel or housing. We also have the movement of the moon that still pulls the tides, and the earth continues to turn according to rhythms that no human authority commands. And this eclipse gives us the image on a cosmic scale. Even the sun, our great symbol of constancy, central authority and life force, participates in a larger pattern. Modern culture places enormous value upon autonomy. We're encouraged to take charge of our lives, to make our own choices and obviously become independent. These ideas have supported many important struggles for freedom. They've helped people challenge oppressive family structures, restrictive social roles and political systems that have denied them a voice. Yet even autonomy exists within a set of circumstances. A person can be technically free to leave a relationship whilst having nowhere else to live. Someone can be told to pursue work that fulfills them, but they're struggling to make the cost of rent and food. A carer may have the right to make their own choices, but their daily lives are shaped by the needs of someone who depends upon them. A person living with illness or disability may have considerable inner strength whilst facing an environment that limits their access and participation. Our agency is affected by money, health, education, and social position. It's also shaped by the quality of our relationships. Some environments we're in encourage us to think, question, and grow. Others quietly sanction independence through subtle shame, withdrawal, ridicule, or that threat of exclusion. This is sometimes called relational autonomy. It's the understanding that our capacity to act develops within relationships and social conditions. The language of personal empowerment can become harsh when it ignores those realities. Telling someone to claim their power offers little help when the practical cost of doing so is poverty, danger, and the loss of an essential relationship. At the same time, circumstances rarely tell the whole story of who we are. Even within genuine constraints, there might be small areas in which agency can gradually develop. It might begin with naming what's happening or trusting a feeling that we repeatedly dismiss. It might be asking for support or setting the parameters or allowing ourselves to imagine a different future. The first expression of power in the framework for this series is that power over. So this is the ability to set terms, direct behaviour, and make decisions that affect other people. So power over has a really important place in human life. It's that parent that stops a young child from walking into a road, or a teacher that holds a boundary when one student's harming another. It can also be when a government uses its authority to protect rights, regulate dangerous practices, and distribute shared resources. So authority can provide structure and protection when it's proportionate, accountable, and open to scrutiny. So its shadow emerges when authority becomes entitlement. The person holding power begins to believe that their desires matter more than the humanity of those affected by them. Questions are treated as disobedience, and criticism can become betrayal. Other people are valued according to their usefulness, loyalty, or willingness to carry out the will of the person at the centre. And this can happen within our immediate families or at a global level, global leadership. We see it everywhere. So how does that express? Well, it's in controlling relationships or workplaces where employees are afraid to speak. We have whistleblower policies, but often people are still afraid to speak out. And it's also within families organised around one person's needs. We also see it politically when leaders weaken the institutions that can restrain them. And attack anyone who challenges their version of events or use fear to justify the expansion of their authority. We can see that in many current global leaders, and it is something that can lead to an expression of totalitarianism or fascism. So political power also determines which experiences become visible. So it influences whose suffering receives attention, or whose testimony is considered credible, and which deaths are treated as meaningful. So that ability to name offence, define threats, and control the public story is itself a form of power. The next two expressions are closely connected, and I'll be speaking about power within and power too. So power within is the inner ground from which we recognise our own dignity and authority. So it grows as we learn to listen to ourselves and remain present with our experiences. So it might appear when someone realises that another person's disappointment doesn't automatically mean they've done something wrong. It can be as simple as that. And it can also be felt in the quiet recognition that a role once assigned to them no longer fits. So this power within is often undramatic. So it doesn't really come with a great big declaration. It's just a person simply becomes less willing to abandon themselves in order to preserve the comfort of others. So they begin to recognize the difference between responsibility and guilt, and between care and self-erasure. And I say simply, but that can be a lifelong process, learning that. Power within is affected by the world around us. Inner work can strengthen self-trust, while supportive relationships help that self-trust become sustainable. Being believed even can return a person to their own knowing. Having someone stand beside us can make it possible to say aloud what we've carried privately or secretly for years. Then we have power too, and this is the capacity to turn that inner recognition into action. So it's present when we acquire a skill, make a decision, create something, or change a pattern. Someone who's found the power within to acknowledge that a situation is harming them might then develop the power to seek advice or make a practical plan. And a community that recognises an injustice may build the power to organise and press for change. This kind of agency develops through practice and over time. Many meaningful changes begin with small, repeated actions. So we make a phone call or have one difficult conversation. We might learn how a system works or ask someone to help us. And each of those actions can widen the field of what feels possible. But again, there's a shadow here as well. Wherever there's an archetype, there's a shadow. So ideas about personal power can encourage the fantasy that we should be able to overcome every limitation through willpower. When success is treated as proof of virtue, failure then becomes a personal defect. And that structural inequality disappears from view in shadow, and those with the fewest choices can get blamed for circumstances they didn't create. Our power to act is real, and it exists within the conditions of our lives. So holding both truths gives us a more compassionate and accurate understanding of agency. The final expression is power with, and that's the capacity created when people act together. So power with can be found in a group of neighbours caring for one another. During a crisis, it can be workers organising for safer conditions, or people using their collective voice to bring an ignored injustice into public awareness. It's present in community spaces where knowledge and experience are shared, and it allows each person to draw upon something larger than their individual resources. This is the form of power that reminds us dependence is part of being human. We rely upon people we might never meet to grow our food, maintain roads, provide better healthcare, and keep those essential systems working. Even the most public, powerful figures depend upon vast networks of cooperation. Collective power has got its own difficulties. Groups can demand conformity and silence internal disagreement. That shared cause can become so closely tied to an identity that questioning the group feels dangerous. And crowds can be manipulated by fear as readily as they can be moved by courage. Healthy power with makes room for difference and accountability. So it allows people to contribute without surrendering their own conscience. It also asks how a collective uses its strength, especially in relation to people outside the group. These four expressions of power continually interact. Inner authority can give someone the courage to act. Individual action can connect with the action of others and become collective power. Collective action can challenge an entrenched authority. At times, power over might be required to restrain those who are causing harm. Power is not static. Power moves. It passes between people, through relationships, and across institutions. We might hold greater power in one setting and very little in another. A person can be highly respected in their work and feel completely powerless within their family. Someone who's experienced oppression may still have authority over another person. So our relationship with power changes according to where we stand and who is standing beside us. There's also power in the roles we accept and the roles we assign to others. We might unconsciously expect one person to carry the emotional cup for a whole family, workplace, or community. They become the listener, the organizer, or the person who absorbs everyone else's distress. Over time, service can harden into obligation, and an identity formed around being needed can make autonomy feel really unsettling. We'll explore this at depth through Hebe and Ganymede later in the series. The archetype of power also carries the temptation to disown our own agency. Sometimes this began as a wise response to an unsafe situation. Appeasement, silence, and compliance might once have protected us. So we should never bash those traits, okay? The difficulty arises when that old survival pattern continues to govern the present, even when some choice has become available. So we're not bashing the way we had to survive and the tools. They're fantastic tools of survival. But when they're carried and there is no need for it, that's when we need to recognise them gently and work with them to move into our choices. But even so, claiming agency can carry its own consequences. Often we have to tolerate someone else's total displeasure with us. We might need to relinquish an identity built around being endlessly accommodating. And we might discover that people who valued our compliance feel really threatened by our growth. Mature power develops through our willingness to face these consequences. It respects the boundaries and consent, and it understands that influence carries responsibility. So it can share authority, receive criticism, and attempt repair when harm's been caused. There's a quality of stewardship here. We begin to ask what our power's for and how it affects the wider field of life. So a leader becomes responsible for the people affected by their decisions. Oh, wouldn't that be wonderful? A parent gradually helps a child develop their own agency. And we might see a teacher using knowledge to expand the capacities of others. A community holds resources with an awareness of those who'll come after them. So this is an acknowledgement of power and what power, whether we're holding power over, but helping others move into their own sense of autonomy and empowerment here. But for me, this is one of the deeper movements of that Leo-Aquarius axis. Leo brings us into relationship with the center. So that's with visibility, creative authority, and the desire to become fully ourselves. Whilst Aquarius turns our attention toward that wider network and asks how the individual center participates in collective life. The work of this axis involves holding both. We need enough inner authority to recognise and express what's ours, along with enough awareness to understand that our lives are interdependent. Personal power, looked at in this way, then becomes part of a larger ecology of relationships, communities, and shared responsibilities. As we move through this Leo lunation, it may be worth noticing where power appears in your own life. You might become aware of the situations in which you reach for control, or the relationships where your voice becomes smaller. It might be the places where you hold more influence than you usually acknowledge. But you may also notice the people and communities whose presence strengthens your capacity to act. In next Friday's Muse, I'm going to turn to Zeus and the darkened sun, and we'll be exploring power over through authority, entitlement, and control. So we're going to consider what happens when the person at the centre begins to treat their position as a personal right, and why the eclipse offers such a powerful image of the limits surrounding every sovereign figure. As I said, that free Leo resource, which accompanies this series, can be found over at Lunar Rhythms Collection. There's a community there that I've created called the Root and Web as well. So it'll offer a way to follow the unfolding astrology and reflect upon the themes throughout the cycle. I've connected the myth of control above, which is a pretty deep dive into the dynamics of power. So I'm going to leave you, thank you if you made it to the end, but a question that you might want to carry into the coming week. Ask yourself, I should be asking myself too, when I reach for control, what uncertainty am I trying to escape? And what might a more responsible use of my power ask of me? And that's what I have for you this week. Thank you for being here, and until next week, be tender with yourself and honest about what's arising in you. Give yourself the time and space to stay close to your own experience and to listen to what it might be asking of you. I'll be back next Friday with another Muse, and until then, have a lovely weekend. And I will see you in the next one.